where the truth is usually stranger than fiction. The purpose of these shows are not to scare you, but to prepare you, because what you don't know could hurt you. The word says in Hosea 4:6, "My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge." Thank you for joining us. My name is Julie, and here is the host of the show, Barry Meyer.
Hey, welcome to End Time Talk Radio. We have a great show. Now, today is November 4th of 2013. Now, we have V, the Guerrilla Economist. Now, his website is roguemoney.net. Now, definitely want to check out Doug Hagman's site, which is actually homelandsecurity.us.com. That's homelandsecurityus.com. And also stevequayle.com. I've been listening to V on Homeland Security. Last show was October 24th, and this is a man that is a Christian and is trying to get the word out. Now, V, the Guerrilla Economist, according to Doug Hagman, a man who must remain in the shadows to be effective in his battle within the belly of the beast. Now, just who is V? He is somebody who has earned the stars of his shoulder and the scars from battle. He knows the system from the inside out. Also, he has served as a top analyst and commercial broker for one of United Kingdom's biggest financial houses, worked as a commodity broker for one of Europe's largest commodity brokerages, specialized in metals and rare earth minerals, predicted with pinpoint accuracy the play-by-play of the European crisis, was the first to warn about Japan's disastrous economic policies ahead of every other pundit, and an expert on how this would be a domino that would greatly affect the world economy. Also predicted the first shots of the currency war, and the only one who predicted the current state of the suppression of precious metals, calling exactly what the price would be contrary to every other voice in the world today, and a master economic forecaster with a proven track record and uncanny accuracy. V, welcome to End Time Talk Radio.
Thank you, Barry. Great to be on, and I just want to say hello to all the audience that's out there that's listening. I just want to say it's a privilege for me to be on. I just can't wait to really get into things and share things with all of you and peel back the layers and expose this whole contraption for what it really is.
And I'll start off, V. I work for a company here in the United States. It's one of the 500 top companies in the United States. It's actually 13th largest in trucking. And the thing is, they are acquiring things, they are buying up things like crazy, but people do not realize the state of our economy, and most people that I work with, they understand there's something up, but they can't put two and two together. So with that, I'll let you run.
Yeah, the biggest thing is this, Barry. Over the course of decades, I'd say about since the 1950s, I would say there's been a general disconnect and a general laissez-faire attitude that Americans began to develop in terms with the economy. Mm-hmm. They began to take their trust of economics and began to hand it off to these so-called, these so-called wizards, these so-called pundits, these so-called experts. We call them financial advisors. We call them stockbrokers. We call them hedge fund managers. And we somehow took the responsibility of taking God's resources and being good stewards with what God has given us, mm-hmm. and we've relegated that to the responsibility of some other man sitting in a cubicle or in a corporate office in a far-off place, and who's playing, in all intents and purposes, what really accounts to just gambling at this point with their finances. And the way they did this is pretty interesting. You see, you talk to most Americans on the street, you talk to most Christians, they're financially illiterate. They have no idea how the markets work. They have no idea how money's created. They have no idea what money really is. They have no idea what currency is, and there's a difference between money and currency. And they have no idea about how the whole contraption is working against them. And the talking heads on a lot of these financial programs, on these TV shows, these radio shows, they like to pose as experts. They like to give themselves up into this air of superiority and confidence, and they like to make you think that finance and banking is some sort of a black art that is only understood by the initiated few, and is to be handled only by them. And so, not only are we disenchanted because we have this attitude that somebody else will take care of it, but we also feel that whoever that somebody else is much more qualified than we are. Mm-hmm. And that's where the deception takes place.
You know, that's a very scary thing, to put your life into somebody else's hands, because you end up having your brains in somebody else's head.
Absolutely.
So, okay, with that being said, when people, they look at the 401k and they think that is God almost. And, you know, now we're looking at Dodd-Frank bill that's coming through. And, of course, we know that we're unsecured creditors now, but that's going to be even more so. It'll be legal. How do we wake people up?
Well, one thing people have to realize, I mean, let's talk about the 401k real quick and expose that nonsense for what it was. 401ks were never designed to be a retirement account. It was designed as a temporary tax-free holding cell for CEOs of top-level companies to park their funds while they decide what to do with it. It's just a place to park their money. It was never designed or intended for people to retire upon it. Mm-hmm. But yet, as you know, Wall Street began to leverage all sorts of different types of debt, and as you know, things began to progress in the stock market and money market and mutual fund accounts, annuities. You know, these brokers convinced the chief financial officers of many of these Fortune 500 companies, hey, there's no point in having a pension. It's too expensive. Because look, I mean, when you're working for a company, you and your company have opposite, diametrically opposed interests. Mm-hmm. You want to make more money. Your company wants to keep overhead down. Yeah. Overhead happens to be your paycheck. So a company that's you know, where, you know, in America, you know, it's getting very difficult, thanks to regulations and government meddling, for a business owner to conduct business. So if he's looking to cut costs, here you have this fund manager saying, hey, you know what, dump your pension program, jump on board with us, let's get this 401k thing going, and you can do matching contributions. It's a great idea. And they began a whole marketing campaign where they brainwashed the American populace, thinking that a 401k is somehow superior to a pension and they can retire upon it. Think about it. A young person or anybody these days gets a job with a new company. What do they think? Oh, I got benefits, I got a 401k, like it's something. It's the most insane thing in the world. A 401k is nothing. It doesn't exist. It's just, if you think that you're going to have something to retire upon in the way that the economy is going, you got another thing coming to you. Now, Barry just mentioned Dodd-Frank. Mm-hmm. Now, some of you out there listening might be wondering, what the heck is Dodd-Frank? Yeah. Well, if you go on roguemoney.net, which is my membership site, and folks, for less than the price of coffee per month, it's less than $3 a month, you get the in-depth financial news. I kind of detailed Dodd-Frank on my website, but I'm going to explain a little bit of what Dodd-Frank is. It's basically, you ready for this, America? We are joining the bail-in club. Okay? Now, you know, the thing about the bail-in club, you probably heard about the test run in a small little island called Cyprus. Mm-hmm. Well, that test run, folks, went off without a hitch, and it was very successful, but they decided to bring it over here. And just like Barry said, with Dodd-Frank, okay, you're no longer a depositor in your bank, but now you're an unsecured creditor. And then the FDIC, along with the IMF and the World Bank and the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank, have decided to come together and create a global standard of what's considered to be strategically important financial institutions. In other words, you're too big to fail banks. And it's very integral to this whole bankster scheme to have these too big to fail banks led by too big to jail CEOs to ever let them fail. So they're going to ensure the bank's health, the bank's wealth, and their safety by using your money that you've placed in there in those various accounts you have as collateral for their debt. Yep. I mean, how wonderful is that, folks? Your money will be converted, completely siphoned off, and it will be converted to bank stock. Now, you might say to yourself, well, if they convert it to bank stock, then that just simply means that at some point I can get it back, right? Wrong. When they're going to convert it to bank stock, they did not stipulate when you will have access to it, number one. And number two, here's the kicker for you folks. It will never be marked to market. In other words, there will be no valuation done on the stock of a strategically important bank during a bail-in. In other words, your money's gone. It's toast. Mm-hmm. They're giving you an IOU with a note that says, we'll pay you back anywhere between 0 to 99 years. And here's another thing, just to end the Dodd-Frank thing. It's such a critical bill, folks. You guys need to wake up and really pay attention to this. Call your congressmen, call your senators, get them on the horn, tell them, you got to do something to repeal this nonsense. Because the thing with Dodd-Frank, it's over 30,000 pages. It is the largest bill ever to pass in U.S. history. And if you thought Obamacare was a tough one for the economy, here comes torpedo number 2. Folks, they've had, the too big to fail cronies, they had over 5,000, actually 3,000 to 5,000 lobbyists down in Washington, D.C. They spent over $50 million to ensure that every single congressman and senator passes Dodd-Frank without a hitch. Folks, that's at least anywhere between 5 and 8 lobbyists per congressman and senator. It's unprecedented. Never before in the history of law has been such an armada of lobbyists released in D.C.
I'm really good friends with a former IRS auditor here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and one of the things when he actually stood up. I was at the meeting a week ago. He stood up. He said, according to the U.S. government, I am now considered a terrorist. And he said, when with Cyprus, he said, I can prove to you they were trying to see how this would work and see how the American people would take this. And he said it was with a yawn. They didn't care. He said, they're coming here.
Yep, he's absolutely right. People have to realize the banksters and these disgusting bought and paid for politicians, they have such contempt for the American people. They have such contempt for us because they think that they can do just about any sort of unconstitutional, ungodly, despicable act, and that we would sit there and do absolutely nothing. And we've heard about that German fellow who said, when they came for the gypsies, it was okay because I wasn't a gypsy. When they came for the trade unionists, it was okay, I wasn't a trade unionist. And they came for the socialists, and they came for the Jews, it was okay, I wasn't a Jew. But then finally they came for me, and there was no one left. Folks, first it was the Patriot Act, and it was all these obscene banking laws. It was all the getting rid of Glass-Steagall, the implementation of rehypothecation, Dodd-Frank, Obamacare. One by one, your ability to function and produce in this country and provide for your family, that ability is being taken away. It's being supplanted by a serfdom. And we are on a road to serfdom. Folks, nothing's changed. The same elites that were around back in the Middle Ages, well, guess what? They're back, and they're back with a vengeance. And they want to create a serfdom. They want to have you dependent and impoverished, where not only your property you don't even own, but they want to own your children as well, because we are all human resources.
In today they had a county commissioner on, and they're trying to pass more taxes where we live. And of course, I called him up and I said, "What have you done for freedom and liberty? I mean, you don't lower taxes. You have all this regulation." And of course, when I got off the phone and he went on the spiel, he didn't even answer one of the questions. He says, well, we just got to help the people out. But he's not helping the people. He's just putting people more as slaves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is, oftentimes you probably heard on talk radio, mentioned by a couple of pundits and talking heads about the Cloward Piven strategy. If people don't know what that is, Google it. The Cloward Piven strategy is basically two nut job professors out over here in New York. They were Columbia professors, and they detailed a great way for communists and Marxist-Leninists to collapse and subvert and take over America. And one of the ways they detailed was collapse the welfare and the government entitlement programs. Collapse it by overloading it with dependence, and then start cutting it away so the whole system collapses in and of itself. It's ordered chaos, folks, and this is exactly what you see happening. What happens? Well, Mr. Barry Soetoro, or whatever his name is, gets into office, and all of a sudden the food stamps go from 8 million people on food stamps to about now 50 million people on food stamps. And what did they do last week? Oh, we're going to start cutting food stamps. They started cutting $36 and they're going into this month, and that for some people is significant in their ability to purchase groceries, those who really need it. But to those who are the generational welfare queens, as I like to call them, they're going to throw a fit, and God knows what's going to happen when further austerity occurs. Folks, these are signs. You see what's happening with the food stamp program. You see it's being cut. You hear about Chase not allowing international wire transfers. Those are capital controls. So already we're seeing austerity starting to come into play with the cutting of these different social programs. This government shutdown theater that they ran back in October, it was just theater where they sequestered this. Folks, just like they beta tested on Cyprus for the bail-ins, they were beta testing austerity programs during the government shutdown. They were seeing how people would react. And you know what? It was just another day in America. For most people didn't care. And now we've given these dirtbag politicians the absolute green light to go ahead and to do this same strip mining program with austerity that they've ran in Europe. Now it's coming here. The bail-ins they ran in Europe, it's coming here. So we are a population of willful idiots.
Yep. That's true. V, I'm looking at the news right now. Pennsylvania Food Bank, one of the largest ones out there now, says they cannot meet the demand. We're seeing that everywhere with the food banks.
Yes, absolutely. Food supplies everywhere are being strained. Now, people might ask, well, V, why are food supplies being strained? Anybody that's listening to my voice that's still living in La La Land, or you're still living with some sort of hopeful optimism that this is just a cycle, that it's just business as normal, and the market always comes back, well, I'm going to give a few data points for you guys just so it sinks in real deep. You have 50 million on food stamps. You have 90 million permanently out of the workforce. That means they can't even find a job, or they're working a part-time job just to get by. Okay? Then you have 107 million Americans receiving some sort of welfare. And when you take all the numbers together, folks, you're looking at 52% of the country is effectively out of commission. The real unemployment rate, don't let the government's crazy numbers fool you for 1 second. The real unemployment rate by every major Wall Street firm that tracks it lists the unemployment between 24 and 25%. Now, you take that and you take into account all the other numbers that I just gave to you. Is it no wonder that people have no money to even donate food to the food banks? Is it no wonder that those in need are right now suffering more than ever going into this horrible holiday season, the most broke holiday season on record, where consumer credit will be stretched to the max? It's unprecedented, folks. And this is the strain on the system that these people want. Anything that they could have done to fix this, they could have done it back in 2008. But what they've done is they've not only let this problem run rampant, but they've made sure that this thing fails. And you might ask yourself a question, well, you sound like a conspiracy theorist. What do you mean? They're making sure that this fails. Where's the proof in that? Well, I'm going to give you some proof tonight. Folks, since 2008 till now, they have passed 400,000 pages of regulations. And if you email me at guerrillaeconomist@gmail.com, I will email back to you exactly what those regulations are. But there's 400,000 pages of regulations that make it impossible for a person like you to start your own business, it makes it impossible for a person like you to even live because there's so much regulations, there's so many fines and fees and licenses and taxes that is choking the living daylights out of any type of economically stimulating activity. Real stimulating, not the Fed printing, but real things and actions that cause real growth of the economy, these people have effectively killed. In other words, folks, the collapse of the U.S. dollar and the collapse of the U.S. economy is written into law. I'm going to repeat that again. The collapse of the U.S. dollar and the United States economy is written into law. It is inevitable. It is staring you in the face.
Yeah, V, one of the things that I've been hearing about is that, we take in so much money, we make like $15 trillion a year or something. Well, now we're in so much more debt. Now they've used a thing called knowledge, and they've said, okay, now we have this much more money or whatever. We're actually worth more because it's based on knowledge. How does that work?
Well, the thing is this: when you look at the American GDP numbers, it's completely skewed. It's completely fudged. And I'm going to explain to the public real quick. This is the only country in the world where back in the 80s, right during the Carter administration, these idiots with edicts that I call in Washington, D.C., decided that it was a smart idea to calculate government expenditure as part of the GDP. Now, how insane is that? Can you imagine, Barry, for 1 second, you take out all your credit cards, your American Express, your Visa, your MasterCard, and you throw your debit card in there as well, and you just go shopping in your nearest mall in Cheyenne. And then you tell your wife, hey, honey, look, all the neat stuff I bought, all on credit. I completely emptied out my bank account, and look, this is real economic growth. I've just prospered myself. You wouldn't.
Yeah.
But that's what we do. We calculate our expense as economic growth. We calculate an expenditure as a net gain. I mean, what kind of nonsense is this? You wouldn't run your household checkbook this way. But this is how the feds do it. So this imaginary $16 trillion a year economy, when you look at the real numbers, folks, we're only about, at the peak, we were about an 8 or $11 trillion a year economy. And today, the real numbers, again, using from every firm that tracks it, like shadowstats.com, John Williams' site, the real numbers, we're really, when you look at all of our expenditure, we're really a $3 to $4 trillion a year economy at this point. I mean, that's shocking. $3 to $4 trillion? Why? Well, we have a government debt to GDP ratio of 400%. It's insane. And
most people don't even see
China.
it. Yeah.
Nope. Most people do not see it. And you look at a country like China that only has a 40% debt to GDP rate. And they have a $9 trillion a year legitimate economy. And people say, well, the Chinese need us. They need us to buy all their cheap goods that they unload. Folks, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. When I tell people what the largest sector of the Chinese economy is right now, they're absolutely shocked, Barry. Because when I say, hey, what's the largest sector of the Chinese economy, people say, oh, manufacturing. I'll say, yeah, manufacturing is pretty big. I mean, China produces more steel than the next 30 countries combined, and China produces more concrete than the next 20 countries combined. But the biggest sector in the Chinese economy is finance. And people are shocked when I say that. It's finance in the sense that the biggest banks in China have more market capitalization than their U.S. equivalents. In other words, you look at the Chinese banks. Okay, Chinese banks right now are over $700 billion in total market capitalization. In other words, real wealth, tangible assets, The American equivalent is only at $600 billion. So their financial sector is much bigger than ours right now. Now, you take that into account, and then with the fact that over 20% of the world's global manufacturing happens to run through China. So the next logical step, folks, is when you have the largest finance sector in the world, and you're backed in by the largest manufacturing sector in the world, what's the inevitable outcome? You have an economic superpower whose currency will be the next world reserve currency, and the dollar's days are doomed.
With them become the world currency, they're putting everything in the gold. And when you talk to people about gold over here, they have no clue what you're talking about.
Absolutely correct. Barry, I can show you folks pictures from India, China, Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam. And you will see lines, some lines as long as 10,000 people waiting around street corners in front of a store. Now, for the average American, they might say to themselves, hey, is the new iPhone coming out? Is that why they're standing online? But it's not. People over there are standing online to buy gold and silver. Every time the Western banksters manipulate the price of gold artificially, because, folks, these banksters want you to believe in supply and demand, but for some reason the laws of supply and demand, Economics 101, does not seem to apply for precious metals, because precious metals are the banksters' kryptonite, and they cannot play their financial lunacy games if the currency is backed by gold or silver. But the rest of the world understands the true value of precious metals. So every time the banksters decide to take gold down to $1,200 or $1,300 an ounce, it is a gift to the Chinese, the Indians, the Malaysians, the Singaporeans, the Vietnamese, and the Thais, because they will buy it out feverishly, alongside with the Russians, of course. And that's what people don't understand, folks. Look, people ask me all the time, hey, V, what's the solution? How do I beat the banksters? Don't participate in the banksters' games. Well, how do I not participate in that? You buy real money. Well, V, I have plenty of money. I have $100,000 sitting in my bank account. That's not real money. That's currency. Currency is someone else's debt obligation that's passed on to you. Why the heck would you want to hold it? It's somebody else's liability. Money, folks, for the last 6,000 years of human history has been gold and silver. That's real money. And people say, well, V, I can't eat gold. You can't eat gold. And I say to them, folks, I can take an ounce of gold. I can go anywhere in the world and eat like a king for 6 months. Try that with your dollars.
That's pretty darn good, V. I mean, for 6 months, that's just amazing. You can eat that good for a month. Or that's 6 months.
I have clients of mine in South America, in Argentina, in Uruguay, and 1 ounce of gold will give them a steak dinner just about every night for a whole 6 months. Unbelievable.
Well,
it's true.
I'm going to have to start moving south then, if I can eat for
I think we're all going to have to move. I think we're all going to have to move somewhere or do something the way things are going.
Yeah, that's true. V, my wife and I, we moved outside of town to get away from, town. And, of course, we have a cow, we have chickens, we've done more of a simpler life. And, it's really nice to have that. But the thing is, when things go berserk, Cheyenne's 50,000 plus 60,000 people. We got people from Denver coming up, and that And so my wife and I, one of the things we're always doing is going, okay, one time we're praying, okay, God, if we're not supposed to be here, have us move somewhere else, that you would open our eyes up to things we haven't seen yet.
I have a friend of mine who is, he's served with some of the same big multinational banks that I served with, except he's on the technical end of it. He developed the anti-money laundering software. He developed a lot of the computer banking software that's used by some of your biggest names like Credit Suisse, UBS, RBS, Citigroup, all these major investment banks. And, he's a born-again Christian, and he's come to faith in the Lord, and, he's out of the system, and, they are trying to persecute them. So if people, they're really going hard after this guy. His name is Michael Arevna. If folks want to pray for him, I urgently ask that you all pray for Michael Arevna when you get a chance. His website is revelationnow.net. And what Michael Arevna detailed was actually the new $100 bill that just came out. His discovery, and his alone, nobody else is doing it. He's actually shown that there are actual Hebrew and Kabbalistic writings all over that $100 bill when he blew it up in a microscope. He used a high-power microscope, enhanced the image multiple times, used a computer filter to filter it out, and lo and behold, there are these Hebrew-like symbols. So he took it, sent it to a Hebrew expert, a friend of his who's a scholar in North Carolina, university trained, and this gentleman looked at it, and he was absolutely shocked and fell to his knees. He couldn't believe that this was actually there staring at him. And it turns out, folks, that new $100 bill that's being printed has the names of fallen angels and demons written all over it, and I kid you not, that is the truth.
Really, that's really interesting. Someone told me today at work that they've seen some stuff on YouTube with, if you fold it a certain way, you see a tsunami of a hurricane coming in New York, and if you do something else, you see nukes coming on the United States.
Yeah, I heard about that as well. This gentleman folded these $100 bills the same way people were folding those $20 bills on the build-up to 9/11, where you saw the Twin Towers on fire. You folded another way. You saw the Pentagon burning. These things are just. I'm not an expert in those types of things, but just the fact that something like that is there, it wouldn't surprise me, knowing how things are and knowing how insidious some of these individuals in power are like.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me.
One of the news stories I seen last week, or it was this weekend, about China, about how they're practicing military maneuvers with nukes and that placed on the east and west coast. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great thing. Folks need to understand this. Back in 2009, I was alerted to the fact that it was shown on. You might find it in. If you can still find these video clips, live shots that were taken back, I believe in October of 2009, 34 miles off the coast of Los Angeles, a Chinese sub test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile. I think it was called the JL-12. It was one of the newest ICBMs. And they test-fired that missile 34 miles off the coast of L.A., and that missile landed somewhere in the Sichuan mountainous regions in Sichuan, China. Folks, that was China letting us know that anytime they want, they can reach out and touch us. Okay, and you better believe that this submarine somehow skirted right through all of our defenses, and it just popped up, fired a missile, and disappeared. And we were astounded. Okay, and from what I've heard is that heads rolled that day in terms of having their jobs terminated, because that was an unprecedented failure of our defense network. Okay, so the Chinese, they know, okay, that there has to be a war with America. And if you study Chinese history, and I'm pretty fascinated with these people, and I'll tell you what. See, They're a very smart country, and they're led by very smart individuals. What I mean by that is this. Hu Jintao, Zhang Jiangpeng, these are the former, prime ministers of China. You look at the prime ministers, you look at their counterparts of the Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, the prime minister, the assistant prime minister. You look at these guys, they all have degrees in hard sciences, physics, chemistry, advanced economics. I mean, all these advanced degrees, okay? So the Chinese political class is a very highly educated class, and because of their communistic system, they're not worried about being elected running for election every 4 years. Okay, so they incorporate a plan, and their plan is long term. They're thinking in 5, 10, 15, and 20-year increments. Now you look at the American side of things. What do we have? We have disgusting cronies who only think of themselves, and the majority of our politicians in office have all law degrees. They're all lawyers. How do you like that? So that's the big problem there. So when China's figured out that, they're going to have to confront the United States at some point. And if you know something about Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and the way the Chinese, fight their wars, and you've seen this in the Kargil War against India back in the 60s, I think it was in 63, the 63 Kargil War. China does not like to occupy. Mm-hmm. They like to strike hard. They'll strike from multiple directions at once. They'll hit multiple sensitive targets at once, and then they back off. But they make sure that when they strike, that you are pulverized, that you don't have that second strike capability. That's how hard the strike could happen. So if the Chinese decide to go for a quick strike against the United States, it's going to be hard, it's going to be fast, and it's going to be heavy. And it's not just the Chinese, folks. It's the Russians as well. Mm-hmm. Over the summer, I know some Americans have forgotten, and I know and most Americans don't even know what I'm talking about. But over the summer, we had a Russian Akula-class submarine, the Akula II, which is it is right now the most advanced submarine in the world, and I think they're making another one that's even more advanced than that. The Russians have the best subs, and they have the best missiles. Their missile technology is about 10 to 12 years more advanced than what we have, and that's the God-honest truth. And I had to know this because I had to know defense analysis because I've done work for think tanks before. Oh. So the thing with the Russians, they had an Akula-class submarine pop up out of the middle of nowhere in the Gulf in the Gulf Coast of Florida, and we did not even know it was there. It was there for 2 months until it popped up and said, "Hello, here we are," and floated right out into the ocean. It was another colossal sign of failure of our defense networks. Now people will say, "Oh, we have some advanced weapons. We have the F-22 stealth fighter, and we have the new upcoming F-35. Folks, let me tell you about those two planes. They're junk. The F-22 cannot fly above 22,000 feet without choking out its pilots because their oxygen O2 sensors and systems are so bad that it's literally choking their pilots. So what good is it if you have an advanced aircraft and you can't fight above 22,000 feet? Now, people say, what about the F-35? It is a colossal piece of junk. It is the worst aircraft ever designed. It has massive cost overruns. It is too big. It is too fat. It is too heavy. Its wings are too short. It can't turn. It has no range. It cannot fly well. It will be shredded in combat. The Russians have an aircraft called the Su-35 Super Flanker. And the RAND Corporation decided to run a war game simulation and have the Australians sit down on that in this one. And in this simulation, you had 254 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters going up against the Chinese and Russian Air Force. Sure enough, folks, out of 250-some-odd F-35s that went up against the Russians, only 30 made it back to base alive. And the Australians who witnessed this whole exercise said, and I quote, "It was like clubbing baby seals. That's
Wow.
how bad it is. So this military edge that we believed ourselves to have, even until now, it's gone. We've lost that edge a while ago, is what I want. That's the main idea I want people to get. So economically, we're weak. Militarily, we're weak. We can't even fight a war like in Iraq and Baghdad or in Afghanistan and hold it. So, and our troops are stretched too far thin. So if there is going to be a strike, because the simple fact is that we are defaulting. And that's what I want people to understand. People say, well, the U.S. is not going to default on this debt. Folks, we are defaulting. The entire Western banking system, U.S., UK, Europe, Japan, they are all defaulting. Now, how do you default? Well, you don't want to tell people you're defaulting because you still want to milk them for all the money that they're worth. So what you do is you default by stealth. And how do you default by stealth? Well, you default by debasing your currency. And folks, that's why we're today in what's called a currency war. And one thing that history has always taught me is that currency wars lead to shooting wars. So be not surprised that the Chinese took a naval intelligence ship and decided to do a little drill off the coast of Hawaii. Be not surprised that the Russians have a Tu-160 Blackjack advanced bomber, strategic intercontinental bomber, that they decided to fly it over to Venezuela, okay, which is their equivalent of Guam. Right? Be not surprised that our defenses for the last few years have been tested by both the Chinese and the Russians. Be not surprised. And if we don't tread lightly on this, this is not going to end well for us. Unless we as a country repent, return back to God and the principles that made this country great, because it was great in the Lord, then, my friend, I'll tell you right now, their judgment on this nation will be severe. It will be severe.
I thought was interesting when they did that Red Dawn movie that China did not want it about them, but about, I believe, North Korea.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
It was originally supposed to be the Chinese in the remake of the 1980s classic Red Dawn. But the last minute, because China decided to buy out a couple of Hollywood companies, they lobbied to have China removed from the script. And so they used North Korea. I mean, come on, there's no probability of the North Koreans, a shoestring army that's starving to death, is going to have some sort of an assault on the U.S.
Well, you know, it sure seems like we could really see a Red Dawn event here in our country here soon.
It's very possible. And they will strike hard at strategic targets. Remember, I don't see them as a major occupation force. Mm-hmm. Occupations historically against guerrilla armies and factions never work out well. It doesn't work. But I can see all they need to do is a hard enough strike to a vulnerable, quote-unquote, confidence-driven economy that it would just bring things, it'll be enough to bring a complete halt and an end to our way of life. So to those who survive a strike like that, you're going to wake up in a different America. You're going to wake up in a world where your dollar will buy you next to nothing. You will be like Zimbabwe. And folks, Zimbabwe has the highest concentration of starving billionaires. You will find more starving billionaires in Zimbabwe than any other place in the world because their currency is hyperinflated 240,000%.
Wow.
So we're going to head in the same direction where you're going to have to spend about $1,000 to get yourself a loaf of bread and $3,000 for a carton of eggs. So this is the type of environment you will wake up in because all that junk dollars that we've been spreading out throughout all the world is going to be coming home to roost. And it's going to re-flood our market and bring our economy to a complete halt.
You know, that can be very scary for people that are not even prepared for what's happening. I've always said that if you understand something and what's coming down, that's 50% of the battle. Now you can do something more than the paralyzing fear that's going to happen when it hits.
Absolutely. Preparation is everything. If you're going to sit around to the last minute, and folks, this is the mentality, this is that mental disconnect, this cognitive dissonance, or what I like to call cultural insanity that we have as Americans, is where we're so disconnected And so we're so wrapped up in our day-to-day that we believe it's going to happen. It's always somebody else. It's always somebody else's problem. It's always somebody else's kid that gets kidnapped. It's always somebody else's wife that gets mugged. It's always somebody else's spouse that gets murdered. It's always somebody else's neighborhood that gets attacked. It's not me, my floor, and no more. Mm-hmm. What can possibly happen? And then reality comes a-knocking. And reality comes through your door with such vengeful fury that it will catch you off guard, and you will be on the floor in a fetal position, trembling like a jellyfish. And that's what happens when you are not prepared.
How this is kind of an oxymoron to what we're talking about, but if I might use that word, how do you think Christmas is going to be for America this year? I mean, we're talking about this stuff. I mean, people are going to go out and buy, or people are going to hold back?
Well, what's going to happen is that 50%, or about 47 or 49% of the country is going to use whatever credit they got remaining to max their credit out. Mm-hmm. You know, holiday season for most people is a very depressing time. And the funny thing is they're emotionally depressed. And how do most people in this materialistic country that we live in deal and cope with this type of depression? Well, we go out and we spend. And they're going to feel that maybe, you know what, if I get the latest iPhone or the newest iPad or the newest Android device or the latest laptop or that new cashmere sweater that I've been wanting or that new fur coat, or I go buy a car that I don't need, somehow I'm going to let myself know that everything's A-okay in my world. Everything's fine. I'm happy. You're happy. We're all happy. Let's move on. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to stretch credit this season like it's never been stretched before. And I predict this is going to be the worst holiday season, and retailers are going to be reporting an absolute down. See, one thing that's not reported, Barry, is that retailers since 2008 haven't really made any sort of record profit. It's been dismal every season, and I think this season as well is going to be very dismal. And of course, the media will hype it up. They'll go stand out in some parts of here, like in New York, where it looks like there's no recession, where it looks like there's no poverty. They'll go out in in Manhattan at the Rockefeller Center and Macy's Herald Square and videotape a whole bunch of shoppers waiting online to get their new knickknacks and their new gadgets, and everybody's cheering and smiling. And they'll use this footage all throughout the world in some of the most few remaining affluent areas to give the image that everything's okay in the country. Everything's fine. Go out and shop. Spend money you don't have. But the reality is it's going to be a very, very hard time for most Americans.
Yeah. You know, it's just sad because I know that people do buy things just to make them feel better. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, V, I'm really blessed that I have a wife that is right there with me, that, you know, when I'm telling her stuff, she's understanding to the best of her ability. To the best ability I can explain to what's going on. And, you know, with End Time Talk Radio, we've been able to talk to different people, and it's given us a perspective, not only talking, but then listening to other radio shows so that we could prepare and do the best we could at what God has given us to do. Now, I don't know what a year will be from now. Personally, I don't think I'll be working at the job I'll be working at, the way things are going. That being said, I know that God is linking up people that have like minds, that are willing to serve God, but are also willing to help other people out and be ready for this time that's coming about.
Absolutely. You know, I was talking to a gentleman from this. He works at a newspaper and an online site, very, very prominent media site. He runs the economics and finance section for that site, and he reads my columns. He stays abreast with what I have to say, and he's in the same boat. But he's a very intelligent man, and I've conversed with him this morning, and he said, the way things are set up, we don't have a Hebraic system in the way we are as a church. And I'm like, what do you mean by that, Hebraic? He's like, well, we have a Greek system. And I'm like, what do you mean Greek? He's like, well, at the top of the Greek system, you have like a pastor, and from the pastor, you have the assistant pastor, and the deacon, and the elders, and you have the lay people. It's a pyramidal structure. It's the same way we run our corporations. But the actual Hebraic structure is everything's in a circle. So you'd have your teachers, you'd have your pastors, and they're counselors, and they're working with their people, and they're sharing the word, and you have a great, incredible sense of community. And I thought about that for a second. I said to myself, my God, that's profound, because that's exactly how God is going to move in these last days in this country. It's not going to be these fake, disgusting mega churches with these fake Joel Osteens and all this other nonsense. It's going to be small, community-based organizations, the house church, the home church, your smaller churches. They're the ones that are going to be moving in great spirit and in great power, because that's the only way you're going to overcome. You can have the greatest food supply in the world. You can have enough guns to arm a militia, but you don't have Jesus, man. It's over for you before it even starts.
Very true. We were actually with a group of people that are actually south of us in a church, and it's so hard to find churches nowadays that are, I don't know how to explain it, but it's all about how much the pastor can get. It's almost like a corporation type thing where they're the CEO.
Absolutely.
And that's what's happening.
Absolutely. And look at their wives. Pastors' wives these days are called first ladies.
Yeah, that's true.
What is this? I mean, what is this? The whole church system in North America, I've washed my hands of it. I've thrown it out the window. I don't want to deal with it. I've been blessed when I came to faith in Christ in Manhattan, New York City. I was saved by Pastor David Wilkerson's ministry.
Wow. In
the Times Square Church in Manhattan. And I sat at, in my opinion, one of the most powerful ministries that the world has ever seen. The man was a powerhouse, didn't compromise on sin, had no fear of man, had complete fear of God, spoke the truth whether you liked it or not, cut you to a million pieces, made you wallow in your sin until you cried in agony to stop. And then he'd drag you to the altar, kicking and screaming, and you'd weep and fall to pieces until your life was made right by Christ. And you knew that hell was real, you knew heaven was real, and you knew you had to repent. That's the type of ministries that is missing in this country, or it's becoming so far few and between, it's getting harder and harder to get a hold of.
Yeah, and now it's you're buddy with everybody, and hey, you're okay, I'm okay. So we're all basically we're all Christian squishes. We kind of squish which way the world wants us to go.
Exactly, and the worst disservice we've ever done is to our youth. Mm-hmm. We teach our kids in these youth programs. Let me tell you, I've met one man of God who did the smartest thing. He became a pastor of a church over here in close by in New Jersey. And the first thing he did was fire his youth pastor. That's the first order of business. He fired his youth pastor. He hired a teaching pastor. And because the point that he was explaining to me is this. In these youth group meetings, send your kids out to youth group. Oh, this church is a great church. We should go there. It has a youth group. Well, what the heck do they learn in youth group? Folks, the church growth in the last 15 years has been less than zero. It's in the negatives. The church is losing more members in North America than it's adding on. The young people are gone. Look at all these mega churches. Who's in there? The middle-aged.
Yep.
The young people are gone. Or if the young people are there, you got these wish-washy ministries or these praise and worship bands who look like a bunch of nightclub rejects strumming on a guitar, singing worldly music. And this is worship.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I've had the vast displeasure of walking into a church in the Midwest where the praise and worship team is playing is playing Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd during worship service. My stomach was turning, and I had to head out the back door. But that's what's happening. So we create these youth groups, and we teach these kids how to light their hair on fire and have pizza parties. Mm-hmm. So by the time these kids get to high school and college, they get absolutely razored by these secularists, by the humanists, by the liberals, by the agnostics, by the atheists. And by the time your kid leaves college, they got nothing to do with you, and they got nothing to do with Jesus. It's disgusting.
It's true. You know, I had a chance years ago be down in Colorado Springs at the Ted Haggart's church. And, of course, this was before the whole thing had fallen apart and was exposed.
This is at, what is this, Saddleback Church or Brookback Church?
You know, I cannot remember. It's not Saddleback. It's the one in Colorado Springs.
Where the guy came out, he was having this drug-infested gay relationship with another guy.
Yeah, you know.
All right, I remember. Yeah, I call that Brokeback Church. But
yeah, you know, very true. You know, and I had gone down there. My wife and I are there, and everybody's praise and worshiping and their thing, and I'm like going, God, am I missing something? What am I missing that these people are seeing? Because I got nothing out of it. Of course, you know, years later, right. you see everything. But you sense, you know how it is when you become born again. You understand and see things differently than most people that don't understand.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You have a hungering for truth. Mm-hmm. Not only, and it's your hunger for truth that builds within yourself a truth detector, yes. Where you not only crave the truth, but you're able to discern and recognize the truth when the truth is spoken. So thus, when the truth is not spoken, it leaves you empty, it leaves you wanting, it leaves you dissatisfied. Folks, let me tell you something. When you've tasted the anointing of God, when you've tasted the true, pure words of Jesus Christ, it is like walking into the greatest, most incredible steakhouse in the world, and you've had the greatest slice of steak you've ever had, and you cannot eat from that table and go to something less and be satisfied. And that's what God is dishing out. Yeah,
that's very true. You know, V, you've been really blessing in our life because we've been able to listen and hear things and take it into account and you know, move and do different things. You know, one of the things we did years ago is we got rid of our CDs. You know, hey, you know what? Hey, we've got to pay taxes on it, but I'd rather pay the little bit of taxes on it than lose the whole thing.
Absolutely. CDs are certificates of death. It's a place where you put your money. So your money, and these banks will advertise to you folks, oh, look, put into our CD 1% for the first 3 months, and then you'll get an annual percentage rate of 0.75. You're thinking to yourself, wow, 0.75, that's pretty good because the other bank down the street is giving me 0.25. Folks, the real inflation rate is anywhere between 8.7 and 9%. So you're getting a 1% CD, but you're losing, and you're negative 8% on it. What's the point?
Yeah. And things that even be crazier. You know, with De Blasio out in New York, it looks like they might even vote for him as mayor. How is that going?
You know, New York is a state. It is a unique animal. New York is reverting back to the very policies that have left it broke and bankrupt. And back in the 70s and 80s, New York was a textbook study on what happens when you have liberal policies run rampant, when you have high taxation, high regulations, and tight controls. And we're returning back to that. It's going to drive a lot of jobs out of the city. The thing that keeps New York alive is the financial sector. Because, folks, the only thing keeping this country alive is this fake gambling casino that we call Wall Street. Okay, we don't make anything anymore. We don't do any more manufacturing. I think our biggest exports are trash and recyclables. That's our biggest export. Okay, apart from all the sinful pornography and all the other filth that we export throughout the world, but it's trash and recyclables. So, De Blasio, who is an absolute flaming liberal, he's going to revert New York back to its very polarized, high taxation, high regulation policies. The same policies that bankrupted New York, the same policies that drove New York into the ground. Why? Because De Blasio, just like most uneducated in economics liberals and other people who are in positions of power who don't know how an economy works or how to create a job or how to create wealth because they never held a real job in their life, or worked or created their own business, they think that you can create wealth from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. As you know, dependency is something that kills human drive and initiative. You know, and I like to bring this example up. I was taking my little daughter to the park, and it was me, my wife, and my daughter. And we're in our car, and we're driving up, and you know, we see a sign out there that says, "Do not feed the geese." And we used to feed the geese and the swans all the time. So this time, I was thinking to myself, why? You know, my wife's like, "Well, how come they don't want us to feed the ducks and the geese and the swans anymore?" And then it clicked on me. I said, "Honey, because if we keep feeding the ducks and the geese and we give them handouts, these birds ain't going to fly. No, they're not going to fly south in the winter.
Oh, yeah.
They're just going to be hanging around over here, and they're going to die." Folks, and I'm like, these birds, and I said to my wife, these birds are going to turn into welfare birds.
But yeah, true.
And that's exactly what happens. These animals, that's why I tell you, don't feed wild animals, because it takes the drive to hunt and provide away from them. It makes them dumb, docile, and dependent. And that's the same thing for human beings. You take a handout from the government. Oh, folks, there are extenuating circumstances where you're going to have to get a handout in order to put food on the table. That's fine. But don't make it a generational thing, like some people who say, you know what, I'm on welfare, and I'm going to make sure I'm going to teach my kids to hustle so they can stay on welfare, and their kids can stay on welfare, and you have a generation of dumb, dependent, docile individuals that are parasitic and never produce. And that's what you have in a lot of these large cities like New York, like Los Angeles, like Chicago. And here's the kicker for you folks. You know, we all like to talk about Detroit and Detroit's bankruptcy. But one thing that's not mentioned, guess what city is number 2 to Detroit in terms of unfunded pensions, unfunded liabilities, running massive deficits, incredible spending?
Is that Atlanta,
New
Georgia? New York, okay.
It's New York. New York's the number 2 city right behind Detroit, and that's something that's never spoken about.
And how close are we before we start seeing Detroit in New York?
We're already seeing that. I mean, crime is up 30% in areas like the Bronx, in a lot of the other inner city areas. 30% is a huge, huge jump.
Yeah. And
this is year over year. So they're trying to play down those statistics as much as possible, but you can't hide from the numbers. Violent crime is through the roof because this is a disarmed city. You can't own a gun, and if you try to defend yourself, you're going to be the one going to jail. And the liberal prosecutors here will make sure that you're sent away to Rikers Island for a long time by the audacious act of trying to defend yourself or your loved one. So, because the criminals over here, you have to understand them. Instead of trying to fight back, you should, they'll be advise you to crawl into a fetal position and then try to communicate with your assailant and ask them, why are they attacking you? Do they need a hug? Were they not hugged enough as a child while you're being assaulted? That's New York for you folks. But these numbers are going through the roof in terms of violent crime. So it's already happening.
Yeah.
There are massive these young punk kids running around calling flash mobs. These flash mobs are occurring in frequency in places like New York, in Chicago, which one of my military friends call Chirac.
Chirac.
Chicago is Chirac. So in places like that, where the murder rate in Chicago is more people die in Chicago than in Afghanistan, folks. Wow. Okay, that's the real truth. And you're seeing flash mob violence occurring in great frequency in places like that in Los Angeles. So these things already happen. People ask me all the time, "Oh, V, where's this collapse?" I look at them, I'm like, "You fool." Yeah. Look around you. It's all around you. Just because you have your job still doesn't mean you have escaped, my friend, because the big one, you see, 2008 was a hiccup. Mm-hmm. The big one is coming.
Do you see 2014 being a very pivotal year with everything happening?
2014 is the monster year.
Yeah.
It is the year, especially with Dodd-Frank. One thing people have to realize, the Dodd-Frank bill is an internationally collaborated and standardized bill. What do I mean by that? Well, it's not just the big banks here, folks. You got to remember, the Federal Reserve was bailing out European banks to the tune of $9 trillion, okay, in the Eurozone. They spent money on Santander, on PNB Paribas, on RBS, NatWest, A&B Ambro, all these other banks that are Societe Generale, all the banks that are out there, UBS, Credit Suisse, Lloyd's, Standard Charter, I mean, you name it. So they were doling out, the Fed was doling out money to these banks just like the European Central Bank was. So when they decided to go for Dodd-Frank, it has international standardizations as well as international collaboration. They are going to make sure that this program called Dodd-Frank and its variations, they already have variations of this, already signed into law in Canada. Canada passed their version last, I think it was May or June. Their last parliamentary election, they voted on it, they passed it, the bail-ins were written into law over there. It's going to be done in the UK. It's going to be done over in continental Europe. And Japan is a lost cause, kamikaze story right there. But Dodd-Frank and all its international versions are pretty much the same thing. And because of that, now they have teeth. You see, before they just had a rehypothecation, where on certain, non-segregated accounts, they can use what you have in your account in your investment portfolio as collateral for the loss on the investment house. But now with the passage of Dodd-Frank, the terminology has all been changed. Now those investment banks working in collusion with the commercial banks have now total assets and total access to every single one of your deposits, your checking, your savings, your IRAs, your CDs, whatever have you. So now they have the teeth. Before they had concept. Now the teeth and the claws have been put on this tiger. And folks, 2014 is going to be a big problem because apart from Dodd-Frank, here's the equation number 2 to this big problem. Okay, and that's Janet Yellen, the new Federal Reserve Chairwoman. Now you might ask yourself, who's Janet Yellen? And if you watched any of the clips from CNBC, from Bloomberg Business, from Fox Business, from MSLSD, any one of these alphabet soup networks, they go on and on and on and on about Janet Yellen. Oh, Janet Yellen's so smart. She's the smartest Fed chairperson we've had, which I personally believe was Paul Volcker. Yeah. But they go on and on saying, oh, she's the greatest. She has incredible insight. And they go on and on about her stamp collection. Like somehow Janet Yellen's stamp collection is somehow some sort of a demarcation for her as qualifying her to run the Fed. Janet Yellen is a yes woman. She has done nothing to stand up against any single Federal Reserve policy. And when she was the Fed president at the Federal Reserve San Francisco bank, the San Francisco Fed, she went right along with Bernanke. She rubber stamped with everybody else whatever Bernanke wanted to do. And now Bernanke doesn't want his name and his legacy, what a joke, sullied by the impending coming collapse. They've put in Janet Yellen, okay? And they put in Janet Yellen as a way to hyperinflate to oblivion. She's going to stimulate in ways that even Bernanke wouldn't even thought possible. So when Mark Farber, one of my favorite economists and cohorts and associates over from Switzerland, when Mark came out about a month ago and said, hey, there's no limit to the quantitative easing or the printing of money out of thin air by the Federal Reserve and the buying of U.S. debt. There's no limit to it. They can buy not only $85 billion a month, but there's nothing stopping them from buying $1 trillion a month. So this is the type of insanity that's happening, folks. So when you take those two combinations, and you take into account that we don't have an economy, right? I hate to break it to you folks, but we do not have an economy. When people say, "Well, V, what do you mean by that?" Well, when you have a central bank like the Federal Reserve, that's the primary reason why your stock market is 15,000 points. Whereas the Federal Reserve chairman comes out and says, "Oh, we might taper," and the market takes a nosedive, folks, you don't have an economy. Mm-hmm. Because that stock market is so dependent on the alcohol that's being poured out of the party by the Fed that they're just hoping that the bartender never stops pouring that alcohol. So the party has to keep going. So you don't have an economy at that point. When you have a central bank that's the primary buyer of your debt, because the Chinese aren't buying. In fact, they haven't been funding any of our liabilities since 2011. So if the Chinese ain't buying our debt and the central bank is the only buyer of your debt, you don't have an economy. With real estate, primary reason why real estate is up, 6%, is because the Federal Reserve is stimulating by buying back mortgage-backed securities, artificially raising the value of real estate. You don't have an economy. So in every economic aspect, in every sector where there's economic activity, the Federal Reserve is behind it. That's not an economy. That's a Ponzi scheme. It's a hoax.
I don't know. V, it's just crazy. And see, the thing is with Obamacare, we're just seeing the things that are just coming out. How much else is going to come out that we haven't seen yet?
Well, with Obamacare, we might as well call it what it is. What it is a dilapidated website. And I think this website, completely dilapidated, it has to be done on purpose. I don't know if anybody's that stupid to put out a website that was never alpha tested or even beta tested. And, the lines of code that are on there, folks, you've seen, there are names for certain transformers, like Optimus Prime is on the line codes, comic book character names are on the codes, movie titles, and just all sorts of gibberish is on the line code on the Obamacare, healthcare.gov website. The thing is destined to fail from fruition. And I think it is just a dastardly distraction from what's really happened. Because while we're all distracted with who's signing on to healthcare.gov and who's not signing up, the taxation is still going on. Mm-hmm. I want you folks to think about that. Whether you're signing on to Obamacare or not, the taxation aspect of crunching small business is being implemented. There are millions of people right now, as I'm talking to you, that have lost or are in the process of losing their health insurance. Millions of Americans have already lost their health insurance because of Obamacare, and there's no solution. Doctors are getting fed up, and they're threatening to leave because they're not getting paid. This is a disaster. Mm-hmm. And I believe it was done on purpose by a man named Barry Soetoro, or whatever his name is this week, who spends, last year alone, who spent $1.5 billion on himself and his family on vacations and gifts and all sorts of escapades. So this is a great distraction. And the fact is that this numbskull in office doesn't even care. And again, he doesn't care about it. He thinks you're an idiot. He thinks the American public is an idiot. But they believe any sort of lie this guy puts out. And for the most part, he's right. Most Americans still don't get it. They still can't see the puppet master behind the curtains. So this whole Obamacare, Barry, it's a massive distraction.
Yeah, so what else? There's got to be something huge, because if the right hand's doing this, the left hand's coming around with something even bigger and more sinister, that we could be in a situation going, well, now what's coming next? Or this is coming next, and that's coming next. And so when do the people start rioting?
I don't know what's it going to take for the American to wake up. I don't know if it's going to take the sounds of their children crying in the middle of the night because they're hungry. Maybe that's what it's going to come down to, for the American to wake up and be like, okay, folks, we got to look. The bus fare goes up 5 cents in Europe, and people are in front of their parliaments hooting and hollering and holding up signs. Okay, I mean, this is unbelievable. In Europe, they will absolutely storm the streets and make these politicians tremble in fear over the slightest rises in price or regulations that threaten jobs or things of that sort. And over here, we just lie down and we take it. We just absolutely just lie there like a sack of potatoes, like a bunch of good little slaves getting kicked by the master. I mean, this is the equivalent of like a Civil War era where this drunken master comes in from his work and just goes out to the paddy field where he got all these slaves tied up in chains, and he's just beating them for fun. I mean, that's literally what these people are doing to us. They're beating us for fun. So I don't know what's going to take. But America, you got to wake up, America. You have to wake up. You know, this country has to return towards Christ. It has to repent. It has to get back. And I think there should be millions of people marching in protest in D.C. and all their state capitals, saying enough's enough. Hands off our funds, hands off our money, and they need to do, drastic changes. And people ask me all the time, well, what's the solution?
Well,
folks, yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and finish your thought, and then I'll say something. Sorry.
The solution is real simple. Okay, there is a solution to this. The problem is we don't have the will. Mm-hmm. The solution is this. Number one, we abolish the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. We reinstate the power of printing and the issuance of currency back to Congress via the Treasury. So you return it back into the hands of the people. That's number one. Number two, you reinstate Glass-Steagall. So it prevents the investment banks from dabbling with the funds with the commercial banks. So you cut that leg off. Number three, you institute term limits for congressmen and senators that they can't run for no more than 2 terms, just like a president. And that will prevent the cronyism from occurring. It will keep the system nice and loose because our founding fathers never intended for people to make politics a lifetime career. Never intended it. You're supposed to do your service in D.C., and then when Congress was out of session, you're supposed to return back to your field or return back to your profession, and then return again when the need arises. That has to be reason. And folks, if we can do that, okay, and once we abolish the Fed, guess what else goes with the Fed? It's collection agency, which happens to be the IRS. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't be taxing somebody on their wages. That's unconstitutional. You don't tax a man's wages. You want to tax a business, that's fine. But you do not tax an individual. Just don't do it. But if you're going to tax, create a flat tax. There are countries that have a flat tax where people pay 10 or 12%, and you have incredible economic growth. There's more money in the coffers in situations like that. We have an archaic tax code with loopholes that benefit the wealthy few, and that's got to stop. That's the solution. But none of this will work unless there's the will to do it, and we're willing to swallow some very strong medicine.
Yeah, and the 2 things I see happening right now is, number one, like at work, when I was talking to somebody about, more taxes coming through in our county, and I said, I'm going to say my say, to the county commissioner, saying no. But the guy says, well, we just got to take it. That's what they want to do. And the other thing I see is Christians, they are putting government above what God is saying, and they're doing what the government's saying to do.
Right. And you know what? And a lot of these churches are playing that Romans 13:1, that Romans chapter 13 game of, submit to government, government's of God. Folks, government is not of God. Okay, when you have a government that slaughters 74 million babies, it's not of God. When you have a government that does everything in its political power to ensure the rights of deviant behaviorists, that ensures their rights and their protections, and condones and supports all sorts of debauchery, that's not of God. When a government oversteps its boundaries and begins to trample on your personal freedoms, your civil rights, your personal choices, it's not of God. And when a government makes it so impossible for individuals to work hard, earn a living, and to economically move upwards and to economically succeed, that's not of God either. Thomas Jefferson said every so many years the tree of liberty has to be watered by the blood of patriots and tyrants. Benjamin Franklin talked about there needs to be a revolution. And I'm sorry, folks, but I think that's, look, I know for a fact that limp-wristed states, milquetoast states like New York and Illinois, I'm talking about the Chicago area and California, these states are just going to, bend down and they'll take it. They'll take the beating like good whipping boys, like good little slaves.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you, man, there are states out there like Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona. They're not going to take this line down. So I hope to God that there's an outcry, there's an outrage, especially even among the military, that there's an outcry. And I think it's starting to happen. I think police officers need to wake up too and smell the coffee, because it's your pensions at risk. It's your retirements. And guess what? It's your kids' future that's at risk. And this has to be an outcry. There's no other way. And this is madness, Barry. This is absolute madness what's happening in this nation. I can't even believe I'm living in my own country. I just can't believe it.
Well, even here in Wyoming, we have State Superintendent Cindy Hill. She ran on the Tea Party ticket and got in, and she stood against Common Core. Well, the legislator beginning of this year, I threw it against her, saying that we're stripping all your powers. The governor signed it. Now there's a huge battle. And she says, I'm going to call you guys' bluff on this. I'm not going to take this sitting down. That, the Constitution says you have to change the Constitution. You just can't remove it. And they're trying to do this.
Yep. And you know what? Common Core is a deliberate dumbing down of America. It is teaching your kids, folks, 2 + 2 is 5.
Mm-hmm.
As long as Billy believes it's 5 and he feels good about the answer 5, it's okay and it's right. Let me tell you, folks, something, okay? India and China cranks out 500,000 scientists and engineers per year. 500,000. Today, I don't even think we're cranking out anywhere between 20 or 30,000 at the most. And most of our kids that go through college, 80% of the time, they're too busy partying and fornicating and doing drugs, which is what they learn mostly in school, 80%, and then 20% studying. There's no comparison. There's a documentary I recommend people watching, apart from Indoctrination, which is a great documentary. There's another documentary that was done by a secularist, and this documentary is called 12 Million Minutes. And it was done by an American venture capitalist who owns 4 different software firms. Mm-hmm. And he took 3 of the top students in America, 3 of the top students in India, and 3 of the top students in China. And folks, let me tell you, the American students that, for all intents and purposes, if we looked at these kids in America, wow, these are some smart kids, top of their class, they're going to go into Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Dartmouth, getting all these offer letters, and they're studying these advanced algebra and advanced this and that. And you're looking at these American kids, you're like, wow, these kids are smart. They're incredible. They're winners. And then you look at the Chinese and the Indians, and your jaw just hits the floor. Folks, there's no comparison. The Chinese and the Indian kids have us smoked. Our kids could not even hold a candle to them. And I was shocked watching this. And I said to myself, my God, we are having a massive brain drain. So when Barry decides to create his communist Common Core, mm-hmm. it takes what little we have left and practically obliterates it. Folks, the National, Federation of Teachers, the teachers union, it's not about building schools and educating kids. It's about power. The head of the teachers union, I forgot what that gentleman's name was, but he, at their national conference, got up on stage and said, we don't care about children, we don't care about education, we care about power. Those are his own words, not mine. We have a serious problem. We have so many systemic issues, and I believe the best way to educate your kids is to homeschool them or private school them in a top private school. That's it. You send your kids off to public school, you're kissing them goodbye. And folks, let me tell you something. Every parent that's listening to my voice right now, I want you to listen to this. You don't lose your kids. You give them away. Mm-hmm. Remember that.
Yeah, that's crazy. And Someone said, it's amazing to me that all this stuff is happening in schools, whether it's the Common Core, whether it's the homosexuality that's being taught. You have a choice to either say, okay, this is it, these are my kids, and I'm going to teach them, or I'm just going to keep throwing them out there and let them be taught against what I want to be taught.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Either you let them go as lambs to the slaughter, or you begin to start really teaching them and be the filter for their brain, be the filter for their eyes, be the filter for their ears. Teach them what evil is all about. Teach them what reality is. Teach them why and how the world works. Make them listen to talk radio. Folks, let me tell you something. When I was a young kid, I was watching news programs and I voraciously read so many books. Kids need to get into the habit of doing that. And that's what cultivates real intelligence, critical thinking, independence, and individualism within a small child. And that's what people need. That's what this country needs. Otherwise, we're going to suffer a massive brain drain. And folks, let me tell you something. Talent goes where the money is. Talent goes where the money is. And if our talented kids, come out of college, they come out of university, these top engineering schools that we have here, like MIT and top Ivy League schools like Princeton and Yale and Harvard and Vanderbilt and Dartmouth, and they come out and they see that, hey, there's no jobs here in America and the economic situation is terrible here. Guess where they're going to go? They're going to go elsewhere. I mean, you've all heard stories of the Americans teaching English in Dubai or in China, Americans leaving and going to Singapore. Folks, there are 8.5 million of our countrymen that live abroad, and the majority of them are getting rid of their U.S. citizenship because it's turning into a burdensome headache.
Mm-hmm.
It's a problem. We need to correct this tide.
V, I have to ask you, with a lot of these people that are moving, do you feel that God's calling you to move or to stay here?
I mean, for now, I think the Lord has me here for a reason. I'm going to fulfill whatever call and commission the Lord has for my life. And if God wants me to move, by the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, I can, get on a plane and leave tomorrow if the Lord would will.
Mm-hmm.
And, so the option is there. And I recommend if you really pray about it, I mean, look at your children. If you got children, look at your kids. You got to ask yourself, what kind of future do you want for them? There's short-term plans. There's long-term plans. Short-term, short-term you can do stuff like, I don't know, if you want to, live in a nicer house, go rent a house, or, do whatever you need to do short-term. But have your eye on the near-term future. That if the situation arises and it's time for you to leave, make sure you have your resources in place. Make sure you have your faculties as well as the structure and systems in place that would allow you to exit and expatriate yourself in a timely manner before it becomes so difficult that you can't leave at all.
Yeah,
so have some sort of exit plan. Some people can't leave the country. And I tell people, if you can't leave the country, you're stuck in the U.S., go to the most patriotic conservative state you can find.
Yeah.
That happens in Texas.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of patriots and Christians that are moving into, you ever heard of the American Redoubt?
I heard about it, but I don't know. I've heard that term. I don't know exactly what that means.
It's including of Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, where there's a lot of Christians and patriots that are moving this now.
Yes, you're right about that. Yes,
there's people that we know in Colorado. They have a thing called Amendment 66, and I don't know how it all works, but it's something like Obamacare, but it's in education, and you have to be forced to pay these higher taxes. And then there's some other stuff that's coming down in Colorado where you really don't have a say on your property tax anymore. If they raise it, too tough. And there's people that are that want to move to Wyoming as soon as they can find a job.
Wow. Then there you go. I mean, folks, do something like that. The great Christian Redoubt. The American Redoubt. I mean, I think Steve Quell mentioned that something like that to me a little while ago. That there's sections in Montana that I believe it was the original revival movement that occurred back in the 1900s here in New York. that sprung from that revival movement came the Pentecostal movement, like the Assemblies of God came out of that movement, and what's the other group? The Alliance group, I think it is.
Okay.
That group. Simpson, the guy Simpson, who was in charge of that revival. This was back in the 1800s. And then that group that went to Springfield and started the Assemblies of God, also some of those members went over to Montana, that, Great American Redoubt areas, and they said that God has specifically sealed that area as a haven of protection for believers in the last days. So I've heard of something like that, yes. So there you go. I mean, folks, if you're going to, relocate, do something like that if you can't get out of the country,
Well, with Wyoming, we're only like just over 500,000 people. We're the least of all the three states. We do have a lot of conservatism here, but we have a lot of liberalism, though, too. And I think at least what they're saying is that with the stuff with Cindy Hill and different things that the governor's doing, it's really going to make a lot of people vote. Now, we do have a man that's running for governor named Taylor Haynes. He's a Bible-believing, patriot-loving, God-fearing man that's going to run for governor here. So we're hoping that he's going to win.
Let's all pray for that. We need to. Somehow, godly people, Christians are not involved in politics, or if they are, they're just involved for the wrong reasons. They're playing for the wrong team. People need to understand it's not the Republicrats and the Democrats that are going to save you, because the Republicrats and the Democrats are two wings of the same dragon. So it has to be grassroots. The change that will occur at the federal level must first start at the local level. And that's where it begins. And that's the front lines, folks. Look, we got this idea that D.C. is the front lines. No, it's not. D.C. is the acute symptom of what's happening locally. You start winning locally, and then you can start affecting change in D.C.
Yeah. Well, I know that, I did a show with a guy down at Fort Collins, Colorado, and I know there's more and more people that I'm running across that are like-minded, and I think that God is doing something out here in this Rocky Mountain area. I'm not quite sure how it's all happening, but with the church I go to is a constitutional pastor, and there's a lot of things about the Constitution I did not know that I'm learning now, and
wow.
And it's amazing to me how there are so few pastors that are willing to stake their life on the line for their people instead of their reputation.
Right, and that goes back to what my colleague was talking about, the Hebraic system and the Greek system. The Greek system of church structure, it does nothing but foster celebrities.
Yeah.
You have celebrity pastors.
Yep.
Look at the Greek structure followed to its complete T. You'll have your Joel Osteens, your Rick Warners, your Rick Warrens, your T.D. Jakes, your Creflo Dollars, your Kenneth Copelands, and all your Benny Hinn's, all these nonsense idiots. You'll have that, and that's the end result of it. You'll have a corporation. So what happens? You're some young guy, you love the Lord, okay, you somehow survived high school and college, because in spite of the fact you've had a lot of pizza parties and you lit your hair on fire a couple of times during youth group, you somehow survived all that, and you have this incredible desire to serve God. You go and you graduate high school and you want to go to seminary. So you go to seminary, which is usually controlled by a corporate structured denomination. You graduate from there, you want to enter the ministry, you get licensed, or you get a title, and it's a corporate title from a corporately run denomination, and you just become a figurehead in this whole thing. So that's the whole thing. So when you see the church returning back to its decentralized roots, man, that's when power starts happening,
Oh, that's very true. And what makes it nice is that those people are very touchable. You can come up to them and just talk to them like I'm talking to you.
Exactly. So A lot of you people that are attending these mega churches thinking you can hide out in your sin, or you think it's great because they have a quote-unquote youth group that where the band plays like it's Pearl Jam or something like that, or Metallica. When was the last time you talked to your mega church pastor? When was the last time you went to that guy behind the stage that you sit under there and you're giving your rent money to because you're planting a seed expecting a tenfold return, and you're blabbing it and grabbing it, you're naming it and claiming it, you're chopping it and screwing it, you're doing all sorts of stuff. When was the last time you talked to this guy? And the answer is never. Never. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
So is that what church is? Was that the ideal that Christ left for us on this earth? That, I have called you to build mega churches and mega structures, and I have placed the super pastor and his first lady to oversee my flock. Mm-hmm. I mean, what structure is that except a man-centric Greek structure?
Well, the hardest thing I find out, though, is when people really feel a call by God, sometimes they allow man's voice to override what God's telling them to do.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
That's sad.
And it's fear.
Yes.
And a man of God once told me this a long time ago when I was young. And I was young and stubborn and running my own course because I thought I needed to help God in God's will for my life. And that man said this. He said, V, there's nothing more miserable than a man who's running from the Lord. Mm. So the more you're listening to man, the less you're listening to God, the more miserable you will be.
Very true.
It's just that simple.
Very true. V, I wanted to touch on one other thing before we get out of time here. With the Japanese banking and bonds, what's happening over there?
Well, it's gone to complete kamikaze status. Okay, in World War II, or actually throughout Japanese history, they ran a very feudalistic warrior type, culture. Oftentimes when there's disgrace, what they would do is they perform harikari on themselves. So they take a knife and they stab their stomachs and they disembowel themselves and they die. Mm-hmm. Well, the Japanese economy is performing harikari on itself. It is disemboweling itself. Their bond market is totally out of control. When Shinzo Abe, the current prime minister of Japan, came to power, and he ousted the chairman of the Bank of Japan, the original guy, and he put his own Keynesian crony in there, which is Kuruda. These guys went on this audacious plan to have 2% inflation, and they're going to do it by inflating themselves out of deflation and debt. Well, the problem occurred now that these guys are inflated so much that the price of certain hamburgers in Japan's McDonald's, in the McDonald's that are in Japan, McDonald's had to remove certain menu items because they've gotten too expensive. Mm-hmm. Folks, the price on food and energy is starting to skyrocket in Japan. If the country's problem is debt, you do not solve a debt problem by piling on more debt as a solution. And the definition of insanity has never changed. Doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result, is the definition of insanity. And the Japanese politicians and the quote-unquote economists that are there are absolutely insane. Japan is every night. One thing I said in one of my radio interviews was, as the system begins to collapse, you're going to have confessions. You're going to have criminals coming out with confessionals. And what I meant by that is you're going to have people on the inside kind of whisper and kind of admit as to how bad it is. And that's when you had back in June the Federal Reserve Advisory Committee saying, hey, we've done nothing but blow bubbles. This whole economic numbers is fake and everybody's bank account's at risk. The Fed said that. Okay, the Federal Reserve said that.
Wow.
So next time your financial advisor says, hey, I got a great annuity for you to invest in, remember what I told you, okay? Anybody who says this is a cycle, remember what I told you. The Federal Reserve, from the horse's mouth, said this economy screwed up. There's probably no hope for it, in other words. Now, right after that, the Bank of England, their chairman says, hey, you know what? We've done nothing but create the biggest bubbles in all of history, and I think we're absolutely screwed, for lack of a better word. And then the European Central Bank has come forward and said the same thing. Just 3 weeks ago, one of the chairs at the Bank of Japan came forward and says, every day we are near the point of collapse, that things have gotten so critical that we no longer need a stock market crash to end our economy. Folks, in other words, he's saying the bond market. You got to understand about bond market. People get this whole fixation of stock market. The bond market is twice the size of the stock market, okay? Mm-hmm. And in Japan, it's also twice the size of their stock market. And Japan is the second largest bond market in the world. And one of their top financial chairs, the Bank of Japan, has come forward and said, things are so critical, we no longer need a stock market crash or look for a stock market crash to cause an end to our economy.
Wow.
These are all the confessions of criminals letting you know from the inside how bad it really is.
Yeah, it's crazy. You know, V, with all these things that have been happening, I wanted to let you take we got 15 or so minutes here. You know, maybe speak from your heart. You know, what is God saying to you? You know, just kind of let people know what he's been telling you that you feel free to share.
I want the people of America to know this. Unless you have Jesus, you have nothing. You could have 1,000 ounces of gold, you could have 10,000 ounces of silver, and you could have 10 years' worth of food and 22 different firearms and all sorts of different calibers, and unless you have Christ, you have nothing. Mm-hmm. You have no protection. You have no escape plan. You have no direction. Folks, we're heading into a time of great confusion, great deception, great delusion, and unless you have the Spirit of truth, the Holy Spirit inside of you, you will be led astray. After all, Christ said that if it were possible, the very elect could be deceived, if it were possible. And that's the type of deception I'm talking about in these days. You need to break away from your culture of entertainment. You need to break away from your normalcy bias. Wives, if your husband tells you, hey, you know, honey, it's not a big deal, it's just a cycle, things will go back to normal, smack him upside his head. Smack him upside his head and make him listen to a couple of the tapes that I've spoken about. And if he's still not convinced, there's a handful of economists that are like me, guys like Max Kaiser, Jim Rogers, Gerald Celente, who's a fellow New Yorker that doesn't live too far from me. Mm-hmm. The facts are there. It is a mathematical inevitability that we are heading for a collapse. So wake up and face it and understand and then prepare. Okay? Do something for your children. Get your kids trained biblically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. Be their strength. Be their anchor. Be their filter. Be their eyes. Be their ears. Be their mouth. Be their mind. Protect them from what's to come. Men, my call to you is wake up. Cultivate that relationship with Christ. And we're all guilty of slacking at certain days. We're all not perfect. There's a lot of work I myself need to do. There's a lot of work that a lot of us men need to do. But we need to step up to the plate. Understand what our mandate is as leaders. Let me tell you something how leaders are, folks. When a man, I over the course of all the clients I've helped, all the people I've helped over the past year, it's always the men that are reluctant. The women are gung-ho. They're all right, let's go. But there are some men that are just dragged their feet. They've been chemically lobotomized. You need to shut off the football for a second, guys. You need to shut off the football, and you need to get on your knees. You need to understand not only what God's telling you, but do some research. Find out how your money works. Find out what the Federal Reserve is all about. Find out what compound interest is. Find out what derivatives are. Find out how you're being conned. You're being gamed. And then maybe you get angry. Maybe you get a little ticked off, or you will be motivated to change, because as a leader, you're either supposed to move your family away from the threat, or you're supposed to engage the threat and neutralize it. Those are the two options as a leader. And I don't see the men in this country doing any of that. I see them hanging around like a bunch of Arrested Development little kids watching a football game, drinking down a beer and yelling and screaming. What a bunch of idiots. Get involved in the real sport, folks. The real sport is your life. The real sport is economics. The real sport is how you're able to provide for your family. Get plugged in, get creative. Seek the Lord while he may be found, and turn your heart towards him. And if we do that and we repent and reconcile ourselves one to another, then we stand a chance of taking this country back.
V, this has been great to have you on, and just to really talk about the current events, because I don't know what to do sometimes. I mean, it seems like there's people at work that know I do a radio show and other Christians that around, but it's almost like so often I feel like I get pat in the head. Well, that's nice to know, and then they go on with their life, and I'm like going, "Come on, guys, you have to wake up." And sometimes I feel like I want to wring their neck.
Brother, I feel for you, Barry, because that's exactly how I feel on a day-to-day basis. And I even think of it. I look at data 24 hours a day almost, right? I don't sleep that much. And I'll tell you right now, things are scary. Mm-hmm. This is not, folks, let me tell you something. This is not, oh, that's nice, and then carry on. This is coming down. Your life is either going to change or you're going to die. That is your option. Either your lifestyle will drastically change or some of you might die. That's what you're facing here. It's life and death. But one thing is certain. Your impoverishment, if you're not prepared, is guaranteed. You will be impoverished, beggared, and poor. 100% guaranteed if you're not prepared. And most of you who are not prepared, your life will end very painfully, very tragically, because you will witness death on a scale you've never seen before. I pray to the Lord. I really ask God that he would somehow, just like he saved Nineveh, that he can save America and bring America back. Folks, America turned into Mystery Babylon. We are Mystery Babylon. We're no longer land of the free and home of the brave. We're the land of make-believe and home of the slave, like my wife says. We are Mystery Babylon. We need to repent and get back to being America. Get back to being in God we trust. Get back to being the land of the free and the home of the brave. That's what our founding fathers have fought and died for. And that's what we need to do.
V, thank you very much. My friend, I really appreciate your time tonight.
Barry, it's my pleasure. Anytime you want me back on, please let me know.